How can someone stay in power when they have no clue what they do? You might have had that question when you worked somewhere. Hopefully you didn't. Hopefully you work in an organization where everything goes perfectly smooth and everything goes perfectly fine. However, there's always the chance that it's not the case. And in countless organizations, we know that it's not. A look on evaluation platforms where, for example, on glassdoor.com, you see countless organizations facing complaints of their employees. And the question is, why do incompetent leaders stay in power? And of course, there's a reason why we talk about that. Boris Johnson stepped down. Many people who do not follow it in detail, especially when you're now listening not from the UK, 55 people under his government as a secretary or minister left. One was sacked, which was Michael Gove. After he spoke up, he was fired. Everything, of course, that Boris Johnson did afterwards, leaving, apologizing, so way too late. But that is not a singular event. It's not that we say, oh, we never had that before. How could that happen? It is something which happens quite frequently. And when we talk about organizations, some organizations appear over and over again in the news for not being able to handle it properly. We talked before about, for example, Bill Michael from KPMG, who had to step down after a statement from him was leaked during the COVID pandemic, where he said people should stop moaning and get back to do their job and their life. And of course, he said that, and I think the quote was, unconscious bias is utter crap, which is, of course, a strong anti-science position. That, of course, can never be acceptable for a senior leader at KPMG. They did a very British move, offered him in a very polite way that he can leave on his free will. Otherwise, they would have sacked him, because when you are urged to reconsider your position, when a British person tells you that, it means you leave on your free will or they will get rid of you. However, we now see KPMG making headlines again. This time it's Nada Hafar from the United Arabian Emirates, who's a leader there, where people complained and no one cared about it, as the people said over there. And it's about Nada Hafar, who basically said that people can only keep their jobs either when they agree with them or they're silent. As soon as you speak up against the leader, you will be fired or sidelined. That is, of course, completely unacceptable as a leader. However, corporate headquarters of KPMG does not seem to care. And we now have to see that, especially when you work in international companies of that size, KPMG is not one organization that organically grew to that size. When you enter certain markets, you often use organizations or ask organizations to join your network, but they then work under the KPMG flag and branding. So it's another organization that joined KPMG here. However, KPMG's job, one of the many jobs they do, and often they do brilliant work, I'm absolutely sure about that, otherwise they wouldn't be where they are. However, their job often is auditing, looking that things go right. So when you have an organization joining, you need to be sure that your leaders act properly. And when we have this behavior, again, once more, no one does anything about it. Once more, it has to be leaked to the general public. This is a repetitive pattern of behavior that we see here. However, it's not HSBC alone. It's not KPMG alone. About HSBC we're talking right now. HSBC executive Stuart Kirk said that we don't need to care about climate change, because who cares about Miami being 6 feet under the water in 100 years? When we look at where the waterline is right now, Amsterdam is already 6 feet below, and it's a really nice place. When you hear these statements, I honestly thought someone must have made it up. No, it was not made up. And one of the famous last statements of Mr. Stuart Kirk, who is not in his position anymore because HSBC took appropriate countermeasures. KPMG, by the way, still tells people that they have to stick to the complaint process. And the complaint process, once more, did not get any results. Either there's no result or the result is sorry, moving on. And that cannot be the solution. But it's not an English-speaking role problem. When you look into Germany, for example, we have some German listeners who listen to the English-speaking podcast. People like Professor Knut Löschke, who said that the young generation has to bow down in front of the old generation because we made all their wealth and everything they have right now. Yeah, well, you created the world we face right now. There's no reason to bow down in front of you. And basically, no one needs to bow down in front of anyone else. He's also connected with the AfD, which is a far right-wing organization. Another very valued colleague who I have to protect here. because it's ongoing. There was another professor who said we don't need to take care of gender and gender identity because society is against it, putting the rights of a minority to the vote of a majority. What an interesting approach. Another self-absorbed, self-portraying ego professor who was very upset when someone reminded him of the fact that his university is listed lower than rank 400 internationally, because most German scientific institutions rank very low. I think exceptions are the universities in Munich, Technical University, and the Ludwig-Mein University. They made it somewhere up to the top 50. However, that professor from that university, looking into his CV, public servant sitting on a role with no relevance, then going into public service as a professor on a lifetime assignment. These are, of course, the people we have to listen to. Hint, that was sarcasm. So we see that more and more. And by the way, it's not a surprise that we always see the same pattern of person there. Privileged upbringing, white, male, straight, cisgender. It does not mean that every single white, male, straight, cisgender man is guilty of something. That is not the message here. However, when you are unaware of your privileges, you make statements that are so utterly unacceptable that now they might cost you your job. Because the main problem here is often that saying sorry sometimes is not enough. Getting away with it is what most people look for. However, these loopholes get closed one after another. And now we have to look into how to do it better. So step number one, as soon as you have a statement which is completely unacceptable, no matter from which leader, you can never say, oh, this person is really important for the organization. I cannot do anything against that person because then the person will leave. Well, I can tell you that if you don't do anything against that person, so many other people will leave that this manager or this executive will not have anyone left on their team. So address it immediately. And here it is important because we have a two-sided game. We really have to look into the process, and we have to look into it in a reasonable manner. We're not looking for revenge. We're not looking for destroying someone, because I will mention a couple of cases, one case specifically where things have gone horribly wrong. So you have to address it, but as a question or an accusation. Anyone has the right to listen to the question or accusation and then make a statement on it, or they can even decide not to make a statement. That is there. It is a constitutional right in nearly every single reasonable country. There is an assumption of innocence, and the assumption of innocence applies to absolutely any human being. If you do not apply the assumption of innocence, you failed as an organization. And by the way, every single person involved in the process failed when there is no assumption of innocence. However, there are, of course, now some opportunities and some options you have to look into. So first, there has to be investigation in a timely manner. Do not delay. There is no excuse to delay it. As long as someone is innocent, they can keep working in their position. If they prefer to step away from the position for the time of the investigation, it's their choice. When you force them to do so and they insist on being paid, you have to pay them. Assumption of innocence. Because as long as they have not been called guilty or found guilty, they are innocent. Don't look for revenge. Don't look for pseudo activity. We are in a democratic system where we have to follow democratic steps. And by the way, if you think, and sometimes I still see this happening, if you think you can just chuck someone out and then the problem will be solved, that can go horribly wrong as well. And we have a very prominent case right now. Maybe remember that Mr. Johnny Depp was accused of misconduct and other aspects, serious aspects from his, I think, ex-wife, ex-girlfriend. It was a bit over the gossip news, but also in serious news, it was mentioned. And Mr. Johnny Depp always said he hasn't done anything. And then Disney, without waiting for the court trial, took him off a major role of their franchise. And now the court case ended and came to the conclusion Mr. Depp is not guilty of the accusation. And Disney now has a problem. How do you act as an organization when you chucked someone out only due to an obviously, as we know now, unsubstantiated accusation? Because as an organization, you lose trust, not only towards your suppliers. By the way, any single supplier, any single partner, any single person working with you in the future will say, oh, I think I have to charge you more, because if anyone makes an accusation just to chuck me out, you will follow that accusation with no proof. So I have to charge you more. So the damage will last for years, if not decades to come. So what to do with it? You have to wait for the result. And by the way, if you think that conflicts can be solved by, just sit together and talk about it, that is only possible for very minor cases of conflict. As soon as you talk about major wrongdoing from senior management, you cannot just sit together, because the difference between power of the two human beings sitting there, or even more human beings, is just too obvious. And no one will publicly speak up because of fear of losing their job. And by the way, if you have if you want to do it properly, you protect the victims from being re-traumatized. Talking about what happened over and over and over again with the potential offender, and when you're unlucky, it is the offender. It is like saying, "Oh, someone molested you. Could you talk to the molester over and over again, and others going to be eyewitnessing it?" No, that is not an option. You cannot chuck someone out just based on an accusation, because we have the assumption of innocence. However, what you need, as soon as you now move the investigations forward, you have to work with professionals, and that means you have to hire external people, for example, lawyers to do that, or mediators, or whoever else. And very important now is, do not hire someone where anyone knows, "Oh, that's your best friend from school." I had a situation where there was a major accusation against someone, and then the CEO hired a law firm that was led by his best friend from university. They came to the conclusion, well, not guilty, but no one believed it, because anyone said, "You are hiring people who will always talk what you said. They will always confirm because you pay them, and also they are your mates, your best friends." You need neutral people who are not involved with anyone on any level. Don't bring in some kind of buddy insider deal that is going to get the job done the way you want to have it done. That is not the goal we have right here. However, at the end, we need a crystal clear decision, guilty or not guilty. And just to let you know, I don't want to show off Latin because I never had Latin at school, but there is a phrase that you should know, which is called in dubio pro reo, which means in case of doubt, people are innocent. So in dubio pro reo means that in case of doubt, you always speak in favor of the person that is accused. So if you have any kind of doubt, it means that the person is not guilty. However, when someone is guilty, show proper consequences. What the wrong move always is that you say guilty, then people say sorry and move on. That's not even remotely an option. We had a case at Axel Springer, a major German publisher, global corporation, and the senior editor there, Julian Reichelt, was accused of misconduct towards women, serious misconduct, allegations of harassment, sexual harassment, etc. And he was found guilty of it by an external law firm. Linklaters was the law firm doing the job here, and they recommended to remove Julian Reichelt from his position. What did the board do? They removed him, but kept him on the payroll. What do you think people will know in the future? They know, when you're a senior manager, senior executive here, you can actually misbehave as often as you want. And the worst case scenario is a bit of getting beaten up in public. However, after a couple of months of just sitting at home doing nothing, they tell you, you can keep sitting at home doing nothing, being paid for it. It is a very poor move when someone was found guilty of a major offense, and you do not show proper consequences. People immediately realize when you try to get away with it, and that is unacceptable. And by the way, talking about the general public, should the general public be involved? The general public only has the right of accessing what's going on and hearing about it and getting press conference only when you are a person of public interest. When you are not a person of public interest, there is no right for anyone else to know what's going on there. And there's a reason for that, because we know that false accusations can have significant consequences for your life. And by the way, if you now think, what about not doing anything? Because people might just calm down, someone leaves the organization, we just moving on. Well, what happens then is what happened to KPMG. People will leak it to the general public. And then as soon as that happens, there is very little chance that you can set the record straight, because the public judgment is brutal and it always goes against the person more in power, meaning against the organization, against the corporation. And you do not want to be in that position. Also, as soon as something is leaked and held against you, then you better take a step back and don't look on Glassdoor or the German equivalent Kununu where organizations get rated and evaluated by employees or former employees, well, that number will go significantly down. And that is probably your smallest problem for right now. However, it will be a problem when you try to attract talent for your organization in the future. And by the way, if you didn't act on moments where you had to act, you deserve that things go wrong afterwards, because it was management misconduct and bad decision or not decision making that led to the situation. The main question is often, why do people stay in power? Boris Johnson, for example, could have left way earlier, but he didn't. What is the reason for that? The reason for that is often people want to stay in power. They fear a loss of face, but also they think that their network will simply help them to stay in power. And this network is not really a network. And the reason for that is very simple. A network means you know people, but you give mutual value. So, for example, you have a great consultant, you pay a certain fee, in return, you get great knowledge. But on other terms, you don't know that consultant, not a friend, not someone you went to uni with, not someone you grew up with. It's just an external person helping you. That's a network. Networks are very useful. What I often see are not networks, but insider deals. And that means some people just get it their way because they know people, and they often know people because they grew up with them, same village, same city, same school, same university. And often people know each other with a privileged background. So people with no privileges know other people with no privileges, and people with privileges know other people with privileges. That, of course, is not the way how anything works properly. Having a network is good. Having an insider deal, having nepotism, cronyism in place, people immediately realize and give up on your organizations, and they will actively work against you. However, when someone does an offense and then was found guilty and they paid their dues, which means, and now we have to distinguish between when someone has a go at another human being, there's a high moral burden on them. And then you really have to reconsider, can that person be kept in the organization? In most cases, the answer is no. However, let's say someone had a minor offense, a team lead cheated on the expenses report, got a couple of £100 or dollars or euros out of it, was called out by a team member. And of course, you cannot stay a team lead when you cheat on your expenses report. So you move back being a team member. Then, and that is very important, it is not useful when we practice the non-forgiving society, because then we lose talent, people are frustrated, things get worse from there. And then they often also leave your organization, although there could be a chance that they get better in the future. Resocialization, getting back into society as a human being that has paid their dues. You did something wrong, you admitted that, or you didn't admit it, but you were found guilty and you paid and did everything that you were sentenced to. From there, we move on. However, when there's something where people had a go at other human beings, so not something which is based on a couple of £100 of money, but based on making other people's life a nightmare, that is a complete different game, because there's a strong moral implication. There's also a show of character. And if your character really changed, hard to say. So the non-forgiving society, please be sure that you always offer people a way back. This is how everything works. When people, I just give you an example, the UK now has started one of Europe's largest programs for prison leavers to be reintegrated in society. If we do not do that, these people will become criminal again because they don't have any other chance. If no one hires prison leavers, it means the only chance of them to get money is either live on benefits for the end of all days, and we are all strongly opposed to that, hopefully, or they become criminals once more because they get back to the people they know and it goes south from there. Resocialization, getting back into society, having your second chance is a right for every single human being. One thing, however, I need to add here, and that is especially because this is an international podcast. And when you see what the rules in the UK and the US are, or in Canada and the English-speaking world, and then you look at the German-speaking world, and I specifically, a bit Austria, but mainly Germany, not Switzerland. They are quite strict on rules what people can and cannot do and how you can be removed. And there's no layoff protection, so they can remove you very quickly in Switzerland. However, in Germany, when I see what managers get away with, it is absolutely appalling. When I see German managers behaving, you would be fired in the UK for 1/3. You would be fired in the US for 1/10 of that behavior. By the way, this being fired for 1/10 of it is a statement of the New York Times editor who brought light to the situation, Axel Springer with Julian Reichelt. So when you do not address wrongdoing, but you come up with the usual phrases, that person's from a different generation, they are a bit weird, that person's a bit loud, a bit aggressive, just deal with it, that is how he or she is. That is not how anything works. Set the standards, but then the standards apply to absolutely anyone, and be sure that you set the same rules for everyone. It is not one rule for us and another one for them. When a senior executive on board level does something wrong, which according to the guideline says you have to be removed from the organization, that person has to be removed the same way any other worker would be removed as well. Unfortunately, we see that things in Germany get worse, while in the UK, the US, Canada, the English-speaking world, it gets tighter. So wrongdoing, misconduct from management and executives. Unfortunately, some people try to get smarter with not being called out or not being caught. That is, of course, a bad move. However, when we see that people are unable to trust the organization, that when a misconduct happens, the organization backs them and helps them, then people will not be happy to work with you. And that is a myth which we have right now. Often, and also especially that applies to the English and the German speaking areas of which I work. Often people say there is no workforce on the market left. No one wants to work anymore. That is straightforward and correct. The numbers show we have enough people on the market. What you lack is you want people who just accept that work can be a horrible place, managers and executives misbehave left, right, and center. When I see that people complain there is no hospitality staff left, there is hospitality staff left. However, when you never trained your team leaders and they treat them like a second-class human being, of course they leave and work somewhere else. So stop publishing the myth of a lack of workforce on any of your channels you communicate. See the reality, and the reality is leaders, managers, executives have to step up their game. They have to improve their game and properly learn how to deal with people properly, because it is not enough to be competent on the subject matter. When you deal with human beings, you have to be competent on the expertise level, how to deal with human beings. And yes, they are all different. And yes, it's complicated. And yes, it's complex. And the most important, yes, you as a leader have to learn. If you don't want to, do not be a leader. Very important now, I also have publications about that. Go to expert.nb-networks.com. That's where you can sign up for the leadership letter. Every Wednesday, without any charge, you get everything I published in that week. It's the only channel where you can get that. Any other channel, they charge you. Of course, when you now have a question, drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. Happy to have a chat. The last weeks were very productive. Thank you very much for that. And if you now have something very specific where you say, hey, we need to talk about training, speaking, coaching, consulting, we have a mentoring program or program interim management, or can you speak or host one of our events? Yes, of course I can. But I'm also happy just to chat with you. There's no obligation. It doesn't cost you anything. nb@nb-networks.com, and then we take it from there. Very important as well, by the way, announcement here. When you're listening to this podcast or podcast on any other platform than Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you probably need to shift very soon, because we are focusing this podcast on Apple and Spotify only. So we are now focusing on two main platforms. Yes, we still have the website, which is directly going with our main hosting company that hosts this podcast, and people who are signed up for the expert letter know that link, that URL as well. But any other access is limited to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So be sure that you are on these platforms. And now I wish you all the best to apply what you learned here, because applying the knowledge is the most important step to see the change that you obviously want to have in your organization. I wish you all the best applying what you learned today in your organization. And for this week, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.